So for the people that had to leave, as I mentioned, it's no problem. We're going to put the rest of it online, but I hope the best is yet to come. I want to talk just briefly about the mission that Michelle and I loved and that we've given our lives for and laid our life down. We call it an uprising. It's part of a 500-year plan. Here we go.
And I'm just one of many people rising up around the world to battle for love's ideal in every part of life. I don't mean the affectionate, the erotic, or brotherly kind of love produced involuntarily through the normal course of everyday life. I mean the kind of love that's only voluntarily produced through deliberate action and can supernaturally transform every part of life. It's the kind of love the historical person of Jesus meant when he said, love God with all your mind, with all your heart, and all your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. It's the kind of love that's always contending for the highest possible good in every situation and relentlessly contending until that is a present tense reality. Are you ready to reorient, to rise up and battle for love's ideal, for God, for yourself, for your family, for your neighbors, for your business, for your church, for your city? You'll see. I am.
What do you think? Can I get an I am? All right. And so Michelle and I started something that was started in a dream that we called an uprising, a call to battle. I won't bore you with the detail at the moment, but suffice it to say, I woke up with this word. Kevin, we're coming to the end of an era where single leaders and institutions bear the sole burden for ministering to masses of people who've never learned how to administer the reality of love's ideal on earth for themselves. And so our mission, Michelle and I's, was not to build a ministry, not to build a following, but to equip people to rise up, become self-sufficient, and bring about love's ideal, heaven on earth, in every realm of culture. But this isn't just an idea. We've worked tirelessly, and I'm going to reduce or attempt to, in 3 minutes or less, reduce the entire Bible to 6 verses and tell you that the rest is supporting material. Is that cool? So number 1, he said, the gospel, again, these words are loaded with so much tradition that I wish I had time to unpack them, but I don't. The gospel must first be published among all the nations. Do you know why most people preach? Because this word publish is translated preach. But in reality, the word means to print it, make it known. And so in every country of the world that I have been, the number one thing any despotic leader does is do what? Burn the books. Why? Because people need to read. But publishing can come in lots of forms. It can come in book, it can come in print, it can come in lots of forms. And so Reorient was the first book of 7. The other 2 come out this year. The first was called Reorient. The second one is Revive, Rethink, Reclaim, Reform, Restore. And so the next 2 that I did my best to try to write while we were going through this journey, hopefully will be out by the end of the year. But Michelle loved this vision. Together, we co-labored for it. This is her teaching. Monty, you'll remember this, our very first intensive. As you'll understand from this one, we thought this intensive would be 8 hours. We started at 7 a.m. and we finished at 1 a.m. Never stopped, but just breaks in between, and it was glorious, right? Because it was the first time we had presented this material, and so this was Michelle and I for the first time. And so this is Michelle helping me host an event in her always custom make my own Reorient shirt, which Jody was saying was exactly her style. Because she didn't like any of the shirts I picked out for her. And so this is Michelle and I hosting an intensive in Hollywood on Halloween last year. And so it was so fun. We're sitting at Hollywood and Halloween, okay, at the W. And so literally 500,000 people converged. We couldn't even get out. We were landlocked. And it was crazy, to say the least, but we had a ball. In fact, I was sitting in the lobby. I'm like, man, I recognize you. You look so familiar, and we're getting ready to start the intensive. And he's like, yeah, I'm really interested in this. What is this? And it was Slash from Guns N' Roses. And I'm like, where's the hat, man? I didn't recognize you without the hat. And so anyway, we just had an amazing time. This is Michelle and I preparing for that event. And again, this is Michelle, guys, with 2 double nephrostomies. She's lost 1 pound a day. She's barely 100 pounds. She's on 2 hours regimens of the highest level pain meds, and she's still focused on loving people and the mission, and still looking radiant. Second, you should ask yourself, why am I doing this? So I don't publish books to make money. I've been an entrepreneur for many years. That's not how we make money. We don't do ministry to make money. We do ministry to make disciples. And so he said, number 2, the reason you would publish is to make disciples, but not disciples of us, disciples of love, disciples of the person of Jesus. And so the definition of a disciple is literally one who's willing to endure hardness to become perfected at the highest possible level. And so that's why he used the analogy, Special Forces soldier, Olympic athlete, because it takes time to immerse yourself in something to be great at it, and that's where we get the word baptism. It wasn't talking about the water. It was talking about a lifestyle to immerse yourself to become a master at something. And so we do that through private intensives, but the goal of having intensives, we never allow our intensives to be more than 120 people because there's a greatness of smallness. And bigness, once it captures your affections, will blind you to the power of loving one person. And so I don't care how big the crowd is, I care how hungry the one is who's in it. And so Jesus never talked, you know how many times Jesus talked to a crowd? 3 times. Feeding the 5,000, 10,000, Sermon on the Mount. Maybe the one while in the boat. 3 times. But you know, he never talked openly to the crowd. It says he would speak in what? Parables to the crowd to inspire them to want to know more, but then he would talk openly with his disciples. And so our goal is not just to make a disciple, but to find something he said was even more rare, which was a laborer. Because he said the laborers are few, but the fields are ripe. And so the issue is not the presence of evil in the world. The issue is the lack of world-class disciples who can change it. Don't complain about what the government is doing. Get into government and make a change. Don't complain about the educational system. Become a teacher and change it. Don't complain about there's no great music on the radio. Make it. And so how you change the world is not complaining about the status quo, but a different story that inspires someone to be greater. So being the change. And so when we see someone in an audience that gets it, that we can co-labor, the goal is to not make them a follower. The goal is to come alongside and co-labor with them to extend their reach, to strengthen them in their realm of culture. I don't want to call a teacher out of the classroom to come do ministry because they think it's more sacred. I want to equip a teacher in the classroom to know everything they do is sacred. Because you got to have teachers, you got to have astronauts, you got to have scientists, you got to have musicians. And so if there was ever a revival in human history, we might call it the Renaissance, which was an explosion of creativity. You ever notice why, is anyone in here an artist? Likes to paint, take photographs. But you can't make any money doing that, except you can change the world doing that. Has anyone ever been slapped for putting their elbows on the table? Does anyone know why we don't put our elbows on the table? Are elbows dirty or unsanitary? I mean, I like the skin on my elbow. What's the problem? It turns out that the entire world and generations of children have been paddled for putting their elbows on the table because of one picture. The picture of the Last Supper. And nobody wanted to be Judas, who was the only one with his elbows on the table. The power of one painting to change the world. So if you're a painter, paint. Let us help you do it at epic levels. If you sew. if you teach, if you're a mom, a dad, whatever you're doing that you feel called to do, be willing to love it enough to invest the 10,000 hours of immersion to be the world's best at it. And when we find that, we call them out and help them rise up to do it at greater levels. And so the reason we do that, though, why? Is so that we can love God, love our neighbors, and bring about love in every realm of culture. Why? So that we could ultimately see a city whose foundations and builder was God. I only know of 2 places where Jesus cried in the Bible, and one of them was on the condition of Jerusalem. Why? Because, guys, cities that people grow up in have as much to do with influencing how they'll turn out as the family they live with. And so is a kid from northern Indiana, the smallest actual town, different than a kid who grew up in the Bronx? Why? Because the rhythms, the culture of that city. And so there is a picture. If the goal of traditional salvation was to get people saved and that would ultimately change a city, where is the saved city? 2,000 years, guys. And so Michelle and I's vision was to equip individuals who could run cities a different way. Because cities, actually, I would like to live in a city where old men grow old, people have meaningful work, husbands and grandmas and grandpas sit on porches without the fear of being shot by a drive-by shooting, and kids are playing in streets without a care in the world and have time because there's sufficient meaningful work and houses that they can live in, that they can actually spend time figuring out how to hone their crafts to make a difference as opposed to toiling their entire life away to make a living. That's why we do it. And how would we know if we did it well? Point 6, the world would know by our what? Another word for fruit today would be what? Produce, what you produce. And so make something, guys. Belief systems don't change the world. Michelle and I believed products do. Entrepreneurs don't just make money to support churches. Entrepreneurship is sacred. Jesus said so. If you looked at every person from Genesis to Revelation and asked yourself 2 questions, were they rich or poor in ministry or something we would consider secular work today? Guess what the answer is? 99% were all workers and wealthy. I can prove it biblically. Jesus was a carpenter. Every disciple, 100% of them were workers or preachers? Workers, all the way through with the exception of the Levitical priesthood. And so all that to say, work is sacred, producing something is sacred. And so our 500-year mission is to cultivate, publish, help people disciple up to change the world, co-labor with them as peers to help bring about love's ideal in every realm so that they can then change a city that they live in, their neighborhood, and then ultimately produce products that the rest of the world could benefit to enhance the quality of their life. And so the difference between a kid in North Dallas and Sierra Leone, where we're working right now, or a couple of our folks are, what's the difference? I would argue air conditioning, electricity, food, water, not prayer. If you're gonna pray, pray for what God could have you do. That's love. Make sense? And so that was our mission, and it's the context for what I wanna end with here